Welcome to Beyond Barriers, a series dedicated to shining a light on the inspiring work happening across the Caribbean to advance mental health. As an organization, we believe that while we work to break down the stigmas and improve access to mental health resources, it's equally important to highlight what's working. In this series, we're shining the spotlight on the advocates, leaders, mental health professionals, and individuals with lived experiences who are breaking barriers, challenging stigma, and building hope and resilience through our region. Join us as we celebrate their stories, explore their journeys, and uncover the solutions making an impact in communities across the Caribbean. Today, we're joined by Dr. David Johnson, the president and founder of our organization, Let's Unpack It. And today, we'll be delving into his leadership of Let's Unpack It and the inspiration behind that.
So because you said it's a choice, we front end, and I cannot
age to be a safe space for young people.
And strength is seen as the capacity to suffer. But where does that leave us?
So, Dr. Johnson, or what do you prefer I call you?
Call me David.
Okay, so David, first question, which should be kind of expected, what really inspired you to start our organization, and how has the mission evolved since then?
Yeah, well, Let's Unpack It started 4 years ago, back in January 2020, really as a safe space for young people to talk about mental health, mental illness, and some of the challenges that they're facing. It really came about because one day, feeling very stressed in the middle of medical school, and I just got to social media and I asked my friends, how do they cope with stress?
Yeah.
And the responses that they gave me were quite concerning. Some people shared that they felt that they didn't have an outlet to express themselves. Some shared about some experiences that they had and where they, told someone that they're struggling with a mental illness and they were ridiculed. And so for me, it was a reminder that indeed in the Caribbean, we do not necessarily have the level of safe spaces that we need for young people to communicate some of the challenges that they're facing, but also to learn about mental health. And so Let's Unpack It started as an Instagram page to help young people learn about mental health and mental illness. And then, of course, we know that a couple of months later, COVID-19 descended upon the Caribbean region. And of course, that came with its challenges. And one of the challenges being that, well, yes, we were doing a lot to talk about vaccination, talk about online schooling. I felt personally that we weren't doing enough to address what was very clear, the mental health outcome and the mental health fallout of this very bizarre crisis that we were all facing as a world. And so since then, LUA has really been positioned more so as an advocacy organization that's challenging governments and other key stakeholders to ensure that they can do more to ramp up the level of engagement around the topic, but also be able to deliver some of the resources, particularly for Caribbean children and youth.
Yeah, and that every time I hear this story, it never gets old because it really reminds me and shows me that you found an outlet where there's a lack and you decided to do something about it, right? And you would have mentioned LUA being in that space where now we can evoke change. And I have a question for you, and I'm pretty sure people on Instagram would have seen already. But recently, you would have had opportunities to share about LUA's work globally, including at the Clinton Global Initiative and at the United Nations side event in New York. So my question really is, what has it been like, sharing our mission as an organization on such huge platforms? I mean, that's like top to top. And then what kind of conversations do you have with global leaders in those spaces?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There is a lot of pressure in terms of stepping out onto the global stage. But I think coming back to the reason why I am doing this work, at the core of what I'm doing is to try to empower Caribbean youth, but to also make sure that our story is heard. And so whether it is in Barbados, whether it is in the region or whether it's at an international level, I think it's important as the president of this organization to ensure that our story is told.
Mm.
And so, what is that story? The story is that, by and large, the Caribbean, though it suffers with many crises, is grossly underrepresented, oftentimes at the international stage.
Yeah.
And so, in my going to these events, I recognize what a privilege it is to speak, not just as David, not just as the president of Let's Unpack It, but to make sure that I can share the story of Caribbean youth. Um, and to ensure that when we talk about a lot of these major issues surrounding the climate crisis, for example, that mental health is a part of that story, and that when we talk about broadening global investment, knowing that across the world, certainly within our hemisphere, governments on average spend less than 2% of their healthcare budgets on mental health, and knowing full well that 1 in 8 people, and young people are included in that number, will struggle or are currently struggling with the mental illness or another mental health condition, then it's important that when we talk about investment, we talk about investment in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so some of these global discussions have been quite high level in terms of looking at, the use of, for instance, AI, the use of technology in, treating mental illness and responding to what the world is now come to terms with, a mental health epidemic. Or pandemic rather. It's important that I also remind them not to leave us out of those conversations, and to also realize that whereas in some of these bigger countries they're well advanced in terms of the delivery of services, in the Caribbean we're still at a level where in some nations we do not have the capacity that's necessary, even at a basic level. And so that's part of the conversations, or these are the key conversations that I've been having at that level, to ramp up the level of investment, to make sure that youth have a critical seat at the table, and that to ensure that the Caribbean is not left behind in some of these conversations.
And I like that you said that, and you mentioned a couple things. You kept mentioning youth involvement, youth engagement, Caribbean youth, Caribbean representation. And under your leadership, LUA did launch the Caribbean National Youth Mental Health Focal Points Network, right? With UNICEF, which spans 17 Caribbean islands with young people on it. Right. So what impact do you think that this network has had on the region so far? And then how do you think initiatives like this change the narrative around mental health?
Yeah, I think the critical piece about this Focal Points network is that we're bringing together children and young people from 17 Caribbean nations. And unlike what's been done before, where typically we bring together young people and then they just tell us all their problems, and then that's that. We're saying, no, we need to go a step further. Because honestly, young people are tired of the panel discussions. They're tired of the focus groups and the fora that seem not to bear any fruit. And so we're going an extra mile to say, we bring young people on board, tell us your problems, but also tell us the solutions that you want to see implemented. And when you tell us the solutions, we want you to be a part of the solution. And so one of the key things that has come about as a result of this great partnership between LUA, UNICEF, and the young people who are serving as our focal points is the creation of YoungCaribbeanMinds.com. Why is this revolutionary? Because this serves as a digital mental health hub for the first time, that young people can come to a central area and say, look, these are the resources that are available in my nation. These are the resources available across the Eastern Caribbean, and certainly even as far west as Belize. So that even as young people travel throughout the island chain, whether it's for studying, for work, whatever, they know wherever they are that here is a level of access to support that I can get there. I think that's critical. But this mental health hub addresses the critical issue that was existent at the time that I launched Let's Unpack It, which was that young people did not know where to go for help, and they did not feel at all comfortable in terms of talking about mental health and mental illness. And so I believe that this digital mental health hub is one of those core initiatives that we've launched that can cascade across the region and improve access to mental health care and support through the access to the Young Caribbean Minds workbook, which has been circulated on the ground in response to Hurricane Beryl, and which to date has been accessed by over 30,000 people. By the way, some of those people are not even resident in the Caribbean. So it tells me about the need for initiatives like this, and I'm really hoping that we can build on this work, really get more into on the ground, hands-on activities for children and youth across the region.
Pulling out the youth engagement bit that you would have mentioned, that is one of LUA's core values, for those who might not know. So how does that pillar shape our organization's work? Sorry. And then what makes LUA a model for youth inclusion in the mental health advocacy space?
I thought a lot about what makes LUA different, or prior to this, what would have made LUA different. And I think what was missing within not only the mental health space, but in terms of youth development, youth advocacy space, is the presence of youth-led, youth-centered initiatives. And youth-led, youth-centered initiatives which can stand alone and partner with some of the bigger partners that we know of, the UNICEFs of the world, and corporate and governments as well. So what has underpinned every initiative that we've launched, or every program that we seek to run after, is the idea that we want it to be led by youth and centered on youth. That's important because for me, fundamentally, and certainly for our team, what we know to be true is that young people know the solutions to the problems that they have, and they don't want to just be consulted. They want to be a part of implementing and mobilizing the cascade of actions that they know are necessary. And I think, we talk a lot about the youth are our future. And I like to think of the youth are the present. Because you don't just wake up one day and become a prime minister. You don't just wake up one day and become a successful project manager. I think mentorship and exposure and practice are key in terms of being able to develop that skill set that's necessary. And so I think if we can get young people together, engage them, get to understand what are the problems that they face on a daily basis, particularly around mental health, then we get a bit closer to shaping what those solutions look like. And I think young people leading this effort, that degree of taking ownership and accountability, and being able to shape that level of change that they want to see, makes them not only more active citizens, but it makes our embodiment of health and wellness across the region that much greater, that much more meaningful, that much more worthwhile, because young people are shaping exactly what they want to receive. And so if I have a particular concern around access and that's being met, then automatically I start to feel as though I cannot access my human right to mental health and well-being. And I feel more empowered then, not only to seek help, but to also show up and support others and be able to refer them onto the adequate services and so on. So I think that bit is crucial. And I think one thing that we've tried to do as an organization is to position ourselves as that model organization, to show young people, hey, it's possible. And to also show them what good stewardship looks like. I think one thing that we always try to do, and you know this, is that when we step into the space, we're stepping into the space to represent the voice of young people. And so it means that it's necessary for us to listen to them. But beyond that, that we're not stepping into the limelight and traveling for the sake of doing so. That when we go to these conferences and we go abroad as representatives of LUA, that we take with us our story, and that we take with us physically and in spirit young people who are interested in these core issues, and ensure that we're creating the platforms like the National Focal Points Network, like our ambassador program, like the volunteer program that we're about to embark on, to ensure that young people can be more actively involved
Yeah.
in this work.
Yeah. And I think what I'm getting from you is that we're done begging. We're not asking for a seat. We're bringing our seat to the table,
Correct.
and you're going to listen to us. If you don't listen, we create our own things, which you have just explained. And I think that's very important, because it shouldn't have to feel as if we can't be the future, you're present, and then we have to be begging for that seat.
Correct.
Then like there's a disconnect between what you're saying and what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's like so important because we are going to inherit the consequences of the
Yeah.
actions that are taken today. And so I think it's imperative that there is a partnership with young people now.
Yeah. So I'm gonna close with this question. I know that this kind of is close to the hearts of advocates, especially those who would have started really young in age. And we're so accustomed to no's and not yet, or we don't have the funds, or we don't have the resources. But what keeps you, David Johnson, someone who just finished his medical degree, he's a medical doctor now, like what keeps you motivated to continue advocating for mental health? Well, for youth mental health specifically, right? What is that main thing? Because I know that you have a couple of them, but what is that main point? And then what is next for LUA?
Ooh, I think my heart is in this work. That's the honest truth. And I like to share with others that my purpose, and I know that that's a buzzword, purpose, and for some it's harder to find, and I think that's because we put a lot of pressure on it, but mine has been through deep soul searching and just being practical about the skills that I have and realizing the impact that I can have on others. And my core purpose is to serve and empower others, and LUA is a platform for me to do that. I look around me and I see the struggle that young people have as it relates to mental health and well-being, the limited access to support, the stigma that still exists, the misconceptions that still exist, and the fact that within our culture, we put a lot of emphasis on strength, and strength not in the sense of that internal strength, but strength in terms of the facade. And so I see it as a core mission of mine to break that down, because I believe, as a medical professional, that it is really everyone's human right to access high quality mental health and well-being. And so in order for me to make that a reality, I need to do something about the existing stigma, the existing limited access that young people face. And so despite all the challenges that we face, as any organization which is trying to achieve any good purpose will face, challenges as it relates to funding, as it relates to having that human resources network that's necessary to advance the work, working through teething issues as it relates to partnerships and collaborations. All of that is important in terms of getting to that goal and to that vision that we all have of a society where everyone can enjoy their right to mental health and well-being. So I think it's that, and it's the fact that I'm seeing the impact. And sometimes we look for impact in these very grand things, but the fact that we were able to release a workbook on the cusp, little did we know, of a hurricane coming in and completely destroying Grenada, Petite, Martinique, and Carriacou, and the impacts it had on St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and how that workbook has now been rolled out alongside PFA training with UNICEF. It speaks volumes to what we can do when we take small, meaningful actions, and that's where LUA came from. A small, meaningful action to create change, and has grown into what we see before us today. So I think that's a reason to move forward. And in terms of what's next,
one thing for the viewers, just one thing.
Just one thing. I really want us to get into schools in a stronger, more robust way. And I see that happening very soon.
Well, you heard it here first. So thank you so much for joining in on episode 1 of Beyond Barriers. Come next week for Fostering Mental Health Partnerships with a very special guest. Wink, wink. But thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, or David, for being here. And really thank you for having this vision or having this inspiration, really creating what has become really the model for other organizations in the mental health space. So thank you very much.
Cheers.